There was a time in my life when I didn't know if I would survive my teenage years. Those were some of the darkest moments of my life where I struggled with thoughts of ending my life. And that season, walking through it, looking back now, I truly believe that the prayers my mom prayed over me were protecting me, even when I had walked away from God. Hi, my name is Sarah, and this is the story of how Bethel St. Mary's brought me back to God. I actually grew up in a Christian household. Faith has always been part of my childhood. My mom is incredibly strong, especially in her faith, and she has been my prayer warrior my entire life. My biological father passed away before I was born, so I grew up never knowing him, and eventually my mom met a man who would become my stepdad, and he's the only father I've ever really known, to the point where most people actually don't know he's not my biological dad, because he really is my dad in every sense of the way. Looking back now, I can see how much my mom's faith just shaped the foundation of my life. But even with that foundation, my teenage years were just incredibly difficult, and during those difficult times, instead of turning to God, I turned away from him. As I entered adulthood, my life continued down a difficult path. I ended up being in an unhealthy relationship, and I became a young mom. I was 19 when I was pregnant with my son, and 20 when he was born. From the outside, our life looked successful. We had careers, we had properties, everything looked stable from the outside, but there was a lot of brokenness behind closed doors. We were living really far away from God, and no matter how good things looked on the outside, there was always just this emptiness and brokenness that never left. Eventually, we moved to Ontario, and that's when the cracks in our relationship really became impossible to ignore. Our relationship ended, and I found myself trying to rebuild my life between living in New Brunswick and Ontario as I finished commitments there with my photography business. Eventually, I settled here in St. Mary's to start fresh, and that's where I met Brandon. At the time, neither of us were actually living our lives centered on God. We weren't making decisions based on faith, and our relationship just wasn't built on that foundation. Around that time, I was working in car sales while trying to rebuild my photography business on the side, and my manager actually invited everyone to the Easter service when Bethel St. Mary's first opened. My mom happened to be visiting that weekend, and since church had always been important to her, we went together. Walking into that service just reminded me of the faith I had grown up with. At first, I wasn't fully committed to going. I would go sometimes, especially when it was my week with the boys, but I was still figuring things out. At that point, I was mostly going for the community aspect of things, trying to make friends, just since I was new to the area. Then, as time went on, I became pregnant with our daughter, Paisley. That pregnancy really became the moment when God was softening my heart. I started feeling all these quiet convictions from him, like he was gently calling me back. During that time, I began returning to church regularly, really rebuilding my relationship with God. And later on, while reading through the Bible, I started to notice how many names in scriptures have meaning behind them. So out of curiosity, I decided to look up the name of our daughter, Paisley. And that's when I discovered that Paisley means church. Just crazy to think about. We didn't know that when we chose her name, and realizing that, it just felt like God had been writing that part of our story long before we understood what he was doing. And looking back now, it's just such a beautiful reminder that even before I fully returned to him, God had already been working in our life and just using her to draw me back to him. As I began growing in my faith, God started working in different areas of my life. One of the hardest moments was when I felt God clearly asking me to step away from my relationship with Brandon. That was terrifying. I was a mom of 3, trying to rebuild my life, and the idea of starting over again was completely overwhelming. But one of the verses that carried me through that season was Proverbs 3:5-6. Trust in the Lord with all your heart and lean not in your own understanding. Submit all your ways to him and he will make your path straight. There were many moments where following God didn't make sense to me. There were seasons I didn't know how things would work out financially or practically. There were times when I relied on the food banks and I really didn't know how anything was going to come together. But every time I chose to trust God instead of my own understanding, he made a very clear path forward. And when I stepped away from my relationship, I didn't know what would happen next, but during that time apart, God was working in both of our lives. Brandon began seeking God in a way he never had before. I could see real change happening in his life. And when we eventually came back together, it wasn't the same relationship we had before. It was stronger, it was healthier, and it was built on that foundation of God. And one of the most beautiful parts of this journey has just been watching the change in our children. Faith is just part of our everyday life now. We talk about God together, we pray together, and we're just raising them in a household where God is the foundation. And when I look back at the person I used to be, I barely recognize her. Today, my life is completely different. God opened the doors for me to pursue my dream career of being a photographer again, something I once thought might never be possible. But more importantly, He changed my heart and the direction of my life. My story isn't perfect. We're still growing every day. But it's proof that God can take even the most broken seasons of our life and turn them into something beautiful. And if there's one thing I know, it's this, that even if we walk away from God, He never stops pursuing us.